off the wind-swept coast of Nova Scotia, where the Atlantic crashes against rocky shores and fog rolls in like the breath of ghosts, lies an island that has consumed fortunes, claimed lives, and refused to surrender its secrets for more than 2 centuries. Oak Island is barely a mile long, covered in scrub oak and wild grass. Unremarkable in every way except one, beneath its surface lies what may be the greatest treasure in history. Protected by engineering so sophisticated it defies explanation, hidden by men who had every reason to ensure it would never be found. But what if this isn't just about gold or jewels? What if what lies buried beneath Oak Island is something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous? The lost artifacts of the Knights Templar, objects of such power that their very existence had to be erased from history? Picture this: October 1795. A young man named Daniel McGinnis rows across Mahan Bay to Oak Island, for reasons history doesn't clearly record. Perhaps he's hunting, perhaps exploring, perhaps following rumors whispered in taverns about lights seen on the island at night, about pirates and buried treasure. But when he reaches a clearing on the eastern end of the island, he finds something that will haunt treasure hunters for the next 200 years, a circular depression in the ground, approximately 13 feet in diameter, surrounded by ancient oak trees with branches that show clear evidence of being used to support rope and tackle. Above the depression, one tree bears scars suggesting a ship's pulley was once attached there, and scattered around the site are tools that shouldn't exist on this uninhabited island, evidence that someone long ago had dug here with purpose and precision. You see, what Daniel McGinnis discovered that day wasn't just the beginning of a treasure hunt. It was the opening move in a mystery that would eventually connect medieval warrior monks, ancient artifacts, pre-Columbian exploration, and engineering capabilities that seem impossible for their era. Because when McGinnis and his friends began to dig, they discovered something that should have been impossible: a shaft that descended deep into the bedrock of the island, constructed with a level of sophistication that suggested not treasure hunters fleeing with stolen gold, but engineers protecting something worth far more than material wealth. The shaft, which would come to be known as the Money Pit, revealed its secrets slowly and grudgingly. Every 10 feet, the diggers encountered platforms of oak logs laid perfectly across the shaft, each one deliberately placed to slow any attempt to reach what lay below. At 30 feet, they found a layer of coconut fiber material that doesn't grow anywhere near Nova Scotia, suggesting whoever built this had traveled from tropical regions. At 40 feet, more oak platforms. At 50 feet, charcoal. At 60 feet, putty. At 70 feet, more coconut fiber. But it was at 90 feet that they found something that transformed the Money Pit from an intriguing puzzle into an obsession that would consume lives and fortunes. A flat stone covered in strange symbols. The inscriptions were unlike anything seen in Nova Scotia, a cipher that seemed to promise wealth beyond imagination to anyone who could decode it. One translation, never fully verified, suggested the stone read, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. The promise of such wealth drove the diggers to push deeper. But at 98 feet, something happened that revealed the true genius and cruelty of the Money Pit's design. As the workers left for the evening, satisfied with their progress, and certain they would reach the treasure chamber the next day, A shaft suddenly flooded with seawater. Overnight it filled to within 33 feet of the surface, exactly matching the tidal level of the nearby shore. What the treasure hunters had triggered was one of the most sophisticated booby traps ever conceived. The shaft wasn't simply dug into the ground, it was connected to an elaborate system of flood tunnels that channeled seawater from the beach into the pit whenever diggers reached a certain depth. These tunnels, running hundreds of feet from Smith's Cove to the Money Pit, were engineered with such precision that they functioned as a perfectly balanced hydraulic system, ensuring that any attempt to drain the shaft would be met with an instant refilling from the ocean. Try to imagine the engineering knowledge required to construct such a system. In the 18th century or earlier, these weren't primitive tunnels dug by desperate pirates. These were precisely calculated channels built with an understanding of fluid dynamics, pressure differentials, and hydraulic engineering that rivaled anything being built in Europe at the time. The builders had created a self-sustaining defense mechanism that would protect their treasure indefinitely, using the ocean itself as an eternal guard. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The flood tunnels weren't the only defensive measure. Over the next 2 centuries, as treasure hunters dug new shafts, drilled boreholes, and attempted increasingly desperate measures to bypass the flooding, they discovered that the Money Pit was just the visible tip of a vast underground complex. Additional tunnels were found. Strange cavities appeared on metal detection scans. Bore samples brought up fragments of parchment, pieces of wood bearing mysterious markings, and traces of gold chain. Most intriguingly, one bore hole at 153 feet encountered what appeared to be a sealed chamber, a vault that might contain the actual treasure, protected by layers of clay, cement-like material, and more wooden platforms. The question that has haunted investigators for more than 200 years is simple but profound. Who would go to such extraordinary lengths to hide something? And more importantly, what could possibly be valuable enough to justify engineering on this scale? Pirates are the romantic answer, but they make no sense as candidates. Pirates were opportunistic criminals who operated on speed and mobility. The idea that they would spend months or years constructing an elaborate underground fortress to hide their plunder contradicts everything we know about pirate behavior. They needed their money quickly, spent it quickly, and moved on to the next target. The engineering complexity of Oak Island suggests something entirely different. This was built by people who had resources, time, knowledge, and a compelling reason to ensure that what they were hiding would remain hidden for centuries. Enter the Knights Templar. For anyone who has studied the mysterious disappearance of Templar wealth after the order's suppression in 1307, Oak Island presents a tantalizing possibility. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of Knights Templar throughout his kingdom. The official reason was heresy and financial corruption. The real reason was that Philip was desperately in debt to the order and saw their destruction as the perfect solution to his financial problems. But when Philip's soldiers stormed Templar commanderies across France, they found almost nothing. The legendary Templar treasury, the accumulated wealth of nearly 2 centuries of banking operations, land holdings, and donations from the wealthiest families in Europe, all of it had vanished. Historical records speak of a Templar fleet that left La Rochelle, France, just days before the arrests, sailing into the Atlantic and disappearing from recorded history. Where did that fleet go? The conventional theories suggest Scotland, Portugal, or other European locations where the Templars maintained secret networks. But what if some of those ships went much further? What if they crossed the Atlantic nearly 2 centuries before Columbus, carrying not just gold and silver, but artifacts the Templars had recovered from beneath Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, objects so powerful and so dangerous that they could never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands? The evidence for pre-Columbian Templar presence in North America is circumstantial but intriguing. The Westford Knight, a controversial rock carving in Massachusetts, showing a figure with a medieval sword and shield. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island, built with architectural features common in 14th century Europe, but absent from colonial American construction. Micmac oral traditions in Nova Scotia, speaking of pale-faced visitors who arrived by ship long before the European colonization began. And most significantly for our story, the peculiar features of Oak Island itself, because Oak Island wasn't chosen randomly. Its location in Mahon Bay provides one of the best natural harbors on Nova Scotia's southern coast. The island offers clear sight lines in all directions, making surprise attacks difficult. The local geology includes layers of clay and limestone perfect for construction, and most tellingly, the very name Mahon is believed by some researchers to derive from mahon, an archaic French word, for a type of low-slung cargo vessel commonly used in the medieval Mediterranean. When you examine the money, pit through the lens of Templar engineering, its features begin to make disturbing sense. The Templars weren't just warrior monks. They were master builders who constructed some of medieval Europe's most sophisticated fortifications. They'd pioneered banking and accounting systems that required precise record-keeping and complex calculations. And if the stories are true, they spent 9 years excavating beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which would have given them extensive experience in underground construction and the challenges of working below sea level. The flood tunnels of Oak Island show a level of hydraulic engineering, sophistication that matches known Templar projects in Europe. The elaborate false floors and platforms mirror the security measures used in Templar commanderies to protect valuable documents and artifacts. Even the reported depth of the treasure vault, more than 150 feet, matches the scale of underground chambers the Templars built in locations like Temple Church in London or the Paris Temple. But if the Templars did build the money pit, if they did bring their most precious cargo across the Atlantic to hide it in the rocky soil of Nova Scotia, then we have to confront an even more profound question. What exactly did they bury there? Because if it was just gold and silver, they could have hidden it anywhere in Europe with far less effort. If it was merely conventional treasure, the extreme security measures make no sense. What if what lies beneath Oak Island isn't treasure at all, but knowledge? What if the Templars buried artifacts they had recovered from beneath Jerusalem, objects that predated Christianity, that connected to mysteries the medieval church would have condemned as heretical? What if the real treasure of Oak Island is something that could challenge fundamental assumptions about history, religion, and the development of civilization itself? That possibility transforms Oak Island from a treasure hunt into something far more significant. It suggests that beneath the scrub oak and rocky soil lies not just wealth, but truth so dangerous that it had to be buried, protected by engineering so sophisticated that only those who understood its significance could hope to recover it. For more than 2 centuries, treasure hunters have tried and failed to penetrate the money pit's defenses. 6 people have died in the attempt. Millions of dollars have been spent. And still, the island keeps its secrets. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the Templars understood something that modern treasure hunters don't, that some knowledge is too dangerous to be easily accessible, that some truths need to be protected until humanity is ready to receive them. Tonight, we begin to unravel the mystery of Oak Island, following the clues from medieval Jerusalem to the rocky shores of Nova Scotia, tracing the path of warrior monks who possessed secrets that could reshape our understanding of the past. This isn't just about finding treasure. This is about uncovering the truth behind one of history's greatest disappearances, and discovering what was so valuable that it had to be hidden where only the worthy or the foolish would dare to search. To understand why the Knights Templar might have chosen Oak Island as their final sanctuary, you need to understand what happened during the 9 years between their arrival in Jerusalem and their official recognition as a religious order. History records that in 1119, 9 French knights approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a simple request: permission to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The king, desperate for any help in defending his precarious kingdom, granted them quarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque built on the ruins of Solomon's Temple. For 9 years these knights lived in relative obscurity, supposedly protecting pilgrims, while maintaining a modest presence in the Holy City. But here's what the official histories don't tell you. During those 9 years, the Templars conducted virtually no documented pilgrim protection operations. No records exist of battles fought, bandits defeated, or travelers saved. Instead, contemporary accounts speak of the knights spending their time in and around the Temple Mount, seemingly focused on something other than their stated mission, because the Templars weren't in Jerusalem to protect pilgrims. They were there to dig. Beneath the Temple Mount lies a labyrinth of chambers, tunnels and passageways carved into the bedrock over thousands of years. These subterranean spaces were built by multiple civilizations: Canaanites, Israelites, Romans, and others, each layer containing the remnants of the one before. Jewish tradition held that this was where Solomon built his magnificent temple, housing the Ark of the Covenant and accumulating treasures from across the ancient world. When the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem in 586 BC, those treasures supposedly disappeared, hidden away by priests who knew the city would fall. The Templars believed those treasures were still there, buried beneath centuries of rubble and forgotten history. And they had something that previous treasure hunters didn't: detailed information about exactly where to dig. Before they ever arrived in Jerusalem, the founding knights had obtained documents, some say from monasteries in France, others claim from contacts in the Byzantine Empire, that described the layout of tunnels beneath the Temple Mount and indicated specific locations where valuable artifacts had been concealed. For 9 years, while Jerusalem's rulers and citizens went about their daily lives above, the Templars excavated beneath the ancient temple. They worked in secret, removing tons of rubble through passages that opened far from the public areas of the Temple Mount. They dug through layers of history, finding artifacts from multiple civilizations, encountering chambers that had been sealed for more than 1,000 years, and according to traditions preserved within certain Masonic orders that claim descent from the Templars. They found what they were looking for. The nature of these discoveries remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Some researchers believe the Templars found the Ark of the Covenant itself. Others suggest they discovered scrolls containing ancient wisdom, perhaps, even lost gospels or texts that predated biblical accounts. More exotic theories propose they found evidence of pre-biblical civilizations, artifacts that challenged the Church's timeline of human history, or objects that possessed properties that seemed almost supernatural. But whatever they found, it transformed them. When the Templars emerged from their 9 years of excavation, they were no longer 9 obscure knights. They had become an organization with resources, knowledge, and connections that propelled them to rapid prominence. In 1129, the Council of Troyes granted them official recognition. Pope Honorius II gave them the unprecedented privilege of owing allegiance to no authority except the papacy itself. Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential religious figure of the age, became their champion, writing their rule and recruiting nobility across Europe to support their cause. Within decades, the Templars had become the most powerful organization in Christendom. They accumulated vast wealth through donations and banking operations. They built a network of commanderies from Scotland to the Holy Land. They commanded respect that made kings nervous and wielded influence that extended into every corner of European politics and economics. The conventional explanation attributes this success to military prowess and financial innovation. But the speed of their rise, the extent of their influence, and the fear they inspired in secular rulers suggests they possessed something more: leverage, perhaps, or knowledge that gave them advantages others couldn't match. Fast forward to 1307. The Templars have been a power in Europe for nearly 2 centuries. They've accumulated enormous wealth, built fortresses across the continent, and established a banking system that makes them creditors to kings and popes alike. But they've also accumulated enemies. King Philip IV of France owes them vast sums he can never repay. Rumors swirl about secret initiation rites and heretical beliefs. And most dangerous of all, people are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the source of Templar wealth and influence. On October 13, 1307, Philip struck. Coordinated arrests swept up thousands of Templars across France. Under torture, some knights made confessions that gave Philip the excuse he needed to suppress the order and seize their assets. But when his soldiers stormed the Templar treasury in Paris, they found it nearly empty. The legendary wealth had vanished. And more significantly, if the Templars had indeed recovered artifacts from beneath Jerusalem, objects they had guarded for nearly 2 centuries, those 2 had disappeared. Historical records from La Rochelle, the Templars' main port on France's Atlantic coast, mentioned ships departing in the days before the arrests. Where did they go? The conventional answer is Scotland or Portugal, where Templar-friendly rulers might provide sanctuary. But what if some of those ships went much further? What if the Templars, recognizing that their European networks were compromised, decided to hide their most precious cargo where no medieval monarch could ever find it across the Atlantic, in a new world that officially wouldn't be discovered for another 185 years? The possibility isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. Medieval sailors were more capable than popular history suggests. Vikings had reached North America centuries earlier, establishing settlements in Newfoundland. Basque fishermen were already working the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, though they kept their profitable fishing grounds secret. The Templars, with their fleet of ships and their connections to sailors across Europe, would have had access to this knowledge. And they had something even more valuable: motivation. If you're protecting artifacts that could destroy the Church's authority or reveal truths the medieval world isn't ready to hear, there's no better hiding place than an unknown continent, thousands of miles across a treacherous ocean dot. This is where Oak Island enters the picture. The island sits in Mahon Bay, one of the finest natural harbors on Nova Scotia's southern coast. It's far enough from shore to be secure, but close enough for easy access. The local geography provides fresh water, timber for construction, and most importantly, clay and limestone deposits, perfect for the kind of underground construction the Templars specialized in. If you were looking for a place to hide something in North America, you could hardly do better than Oak Island. The timing works too. The Templar fleet disappeared in late 1307, assuming a crossing of 6 to 8 weeks, difficult but possible with medieval ships and experienced sailors. They could have reached Nova Scotia by early 1308. The winter months would have been brutal, but they would have provided cover for the massive construction project required to build the money pit. Ships moving around Nova Scotia in winter would raise no alarms because there would be no one there to notice. By the time fishing season resumed in spring, the Templars could have completed their work and departed, leaving behind only the most carefully concealed evidence of their presence: the engineering of the money pit itself provides compelling evidence for Templar involvement. The precision of the flood tunnels matches the hydraulic expertise the Templars demonstrated in their European fortifications. The use of coconut fiber as a filtering material suggests builders familiar with Mediterranean construction techniques, where similar materials were used to manage water infiltration. The depth of the construction, more than 150 feet into the Ewood and to the bedrock, matches the scale of underground chambers the Templars built in locations like the Paris Temple. But perhaps the most convincing evidence comes from what wasn't found. Despite more than 2 centuries of digging, no one has recovered anything definitively proving the money pit contains pirate treasure or Spanish gold. The small artifacts that have been recovered, fragments of parchment, pieces of metal bearing enigmatic markings, traces of gold chain, suggest something more interesting than a conventional treasure cache. They hint at documents, perhaps, or carefully preserved artifacts, rather than the bulk wealth of a pirate raid. Consider the cipher stone reportedly found at 90 feet. The symbols on that stone weren't random scratches or primitive warnings. They were a sophisticated code, suggesting the builders wanted to communicate something to future discoverers, but only to those sophisticated enough to decode the message. This matches Templar practices. The order used codes and ciphers extensively in their communications, developing systems of symbolic language that allowed them to transmit sensitive information while maintaining plausible deniability if intercepted. The phrase allegedly decoded from the stone, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried, presents an interesting puzzle if it's genuine. 2 million pounds in medieval terms wouldn't refer to British currency, which didn't exist in that form when the money pit was likely built. More probably, it refers to weight 2 million pounds of something. But what? Not gold, which would be impossibly heavy to transport across the Atlantic. Not silver, for the same reason. Could it be parchment? Scrolls? The combined weight of thousands of documents might approach that figure. Or could pounds be a mistranslation or deliberate misdirection, referring not to weight, but to something else entirely? There's another possibility that researchers rarely consider. Maybe the stone wasn't placed there by the original builders at all. Maybe it was added later by people who knew about the money pit's true purpose and wanted to ensure that future treasure hunters kept digging in the wrong place, past the real chamber into the flood tunnel system that would confound all attempts at recovery. The Templars were masters of misdirection, after all. They built elaborate false treasuries in their commanderies, filled with enough wealth to satisfy raiders while the truly valuable items remained hidden in concealed chambers. The cipher stone could serve the same purpose, a convincing lure drawing treasure hunters. Past the real goal, what makes oak island truly unique isn't just its engineering, sophistication, or its connection to Templar history. It's the way the island seems deliberately designed to test its challengers. Every time treasure hunters think they've figured out the system, they discover new complications. The flood tunnels aren't a single straight passage. They branch, converge, and redistribute in patterns that suggest deliberate complexity rather than engineering necessity. The various platforms and layers aren't just obstacles. They're precisely calculated to collapse if disturbed improperly, ensuring that clumsy recovery attempts would destroy the very thing they're trying to reach. This isn't the work of pirates or colonial settlers. This is the work of people who understood that their cargo needed to remain hidden, not just for years or decades, but for centuries. People who believed that what they were protecting was so important that it justified engineering on a scale that would bankrupt ordinary treasure hunters. People who were willing to sacrifice any hope of ever recovering what they buried, as long as it remained out of the wrong hands. The Knights Templar fit that description perfectly. After nearly 2 centuries of power, they faced extinction. Their European assets were compromised, their members scattered or arrested, their organization systematically destroyed by the combined might of crown and church. But they had one advantage. They knew it was coming. The warnings had been building for years. The animosity of Philip IV was well known. The questioning of their practices by ecclesiastical authorities had been growing steadily. They had time to prepare, to move assets, to hide what mattered most out, and if you're the Templars, facing the destruction of everything you've built, what do you save? Do you prioritize gold and silver, which can be replaced? Or do you prioritize the artifacts from beneath Jerusalem, the objects or documents that supposedly gave you leverage over kings and popes, the knowledge that made you powerful in the first place? The answer seems obvious. Material wealth could be abandoned or dispersed, but knowledge, especially knowledge that powerful people wanted destroyed, that needed to be preserved at any cost. The connection between the Knights Templar and Oak Island isn't just theoretical speculation built on convenient timing. Across Nova Scotia and the northeastern coast of North America, there exists a trail of physical evidence, carved stones, mysterious structures, and archaeological anomalies that suggests medieval European presence long before Columbus. These pieces of evidence don't prove conclusively that Templars built the money pit, but they create a pattern that becomes harder to dismiss with each new discovery. Start with the Westford Knight, a rock carving in Westford, Massachusetts, first brought to public attention in the 1950s. The carving depicts a medieval figure with a sword and shield, wearing what appears to be a bassinet helmet common in 14th century Europe. The style of the armor, the positioning of the figure, and even the punch-marked technique used to create the image all match medieval European craftsmanship. Carbon dating of lichen growth in the carved grooves suggests the image could be 600 to 700 years old, placing its creation right around the time the Templar fleet disappeared. What makes the Westford Knight particularly intriguing is the heraldry on the shield. Researchers have identified it as matching the coat of arms of the Gun clan of Scotland, a family with documented connections to the Knights Templar. Sir James Gunn was a known Templar who disappeared from Scottish records after 1307, right around the time the order was being suppressed across Europe. Could this carving be a memorial to a knight who died during a transatlantic expedition? Or perhaps a marker left by survivors to indicate their route? Move north to Newport, Rhode Island, and you encounter the Newport Tower, a stone structure that has generated controversy since its discovery by European colonists in the 17th century. The conventional explanation calls it a windmill built by colonial governor Benedict Arnold in the 1670s, but the tower's architecture tells a different story. Its design features round arches and a cylindrical form more common in medieval European construction than in 17th century colonial building. The mortar used in its construction contains elements that match medieval European formulations rather than colonial American techniques. And most tellingly, the tower's measurements conform to a medieval unit of measurement called the Scottish ell, rather than English feet. Carbon dating of mortar samples has produced results spanning several centuries, with some samples suggesting construction as early as the 1400s. The tower sits on a foundation of 8 pillars arranged in a perfect circle, a design that appears in certain Templar structures in Europe. Its orientation aligns with the sunrise on specific dates that hold significance. In Christian liturgical calendars particularly, those dates important to military religious orders like the Templars. Then there's the matter of the Spirit Pond rune stones, discovered in Maine in 1971. These stones bear inscriptions in what appears to be medieval Nordic runes mixed with symbols that some researchers identify as Templar code signs. The authenticity of these stones remains hotly debated. Critics argue they're modern forgeries, while supporters point to linguistic features that would be difficult for a forger to replicate accurately. If genuine, the stones describe a maritime expedition that matches the timeline and geography of a potential Templar voyage. But perhaps the most compelling physical evidence lies in Micmac oral traditions. The Micmac people are the indigenous inhabitants of Nova Scotia and the surrounding maritime provinces. Their oral histories speak of encounters with pale-skinned visitors who arrived by ship long before the European colonization period. These visitors are described as peaceful traders who established temporary settlements, conducted what sounds like mining or excavation operations, and eventually departed, leaving behind stone markers and unusual artifacts. Some Micmac traditions specifically describe these visitors as wearing crosses and conducting religious ceremonies. One account speaks of strangers who dug in the earth looking for the bones of their gods, a description that could match Templars searching for artifacts or establishing a hiding place for objects they considered sacred. The Micmac word for these visitors, preserved in oral tradition, has been interpreted by some linguists as potentially derived from medieval French terms, now focused specifically on Oak Island and the physical evidence found there over 2 centuries of excavation. Beyond the engineered features of the money pit itself, numerous artifacts have been recovered that suggest medieval European presence. A stone with carved markings resembling a cross has been found in the money pit area. Fragments of parchment have been recovered from bore samples at depths where they shouldn't exist if the shaft was simply a colonial-era construction. Pieces of metal bearing what some researchers identify as medieval forging techniques have been pulled from the flood tunnel systems. Most intriguingly, in 2017, researchers using advanced metal detection equipment identified what appears to be a cross-shaped metal object buried deep beneath the island, approximately 140 feet down precisely where the supposed treasure chamber should be located. The object's shape and size match descriptions of processional crosses used in medieval religious ceremonies. If it could be recovered intact and dated accurately, it might finally provide definitive proof of who built the money pit and when. The geography of Oak Island itself contains clues. The island sits at roughly 44 degrees north latitude, the same latitude as Rochelle, France, the port from which the Templar fleet allegedly departed. Medieval navigators, lacking precise longitude-determining instruments, often sailed along known latitudes to reach their destinations. A fleet leaving La Rochelle and sailing due west would naturally arrive somewhere along the Nova Scotia coast. Oak Island, with its excellent harbor and strategic location, would be an obvious choice for a landing site. The local geology also matches Templar needs perfectly. The island contains clay deposits ideal for creating watertight seals in underground construction. The limestone bedrock provides stable material for tunneling. The nearby forests offered abundant timber for platforms and supports. Freshwater streams on the island would support a construction crew for months. It's as if someone surveyed multiple sites and selected Oak Island specifically for its construction advantages. Then there are the symbolic markers. Various researchers have identified stone arrangements on Oak Island that allegedly form geometric patterns, triangles, crosses, and other shapes that match Templar symbolic systems. While some of these identifications are speculative, others are more convincing. A triangle of beach stones at Smith's Cove, where the flood tunnels emerge, has been surveyed and found to have precise angular measurements that match symbolic geometry used in medieval religious architecture. The famous drilled rocks scattered across the island present. Another mystery. These are boulders with precision-drilled holes, clearly man-made, whose purpose remains unknown. Some researchers suggest they were used as anchoring points for machinery during the money pit's construction. Others propose they're survey markers, positioned according to a geometric plan that hasn't been fully deciphered. Their very existence proves that someone with advanced stone-working capabilities common in medieval Europe but rare in pre-colonial America, worked on Oak Island at some point. Carbon dating of wood samples from various depths in the money pit has produced a range of dates, but several cluster around 1350 to 1400 AD. This is precisely the period when Templar survivors would have been establishing hidden refuges far from European authority. The wood species identified, oak, spruce, and pine, are all native to Nova Scotia and would have been readily available to medieval builders working on the island. But here's where the evidence becomes truly fascinating. The money pit wasn't the only construction on Oak Island. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern surveying techniques have revealed multiple additional shafts and tunnels, creating a complex underground network far more extensive than the single treasure shaft described in early accounts. This suggests not a hasty burial of stolen goods, but a carefully planned underground complex designed for long-term preservation of multiple objects or caches. One particularly intriguing feature discovered through modern surveying is what appears to be a chapel-like structure approximately 170 feet beneath the island's surface. The chamber, if it exists, is roughly circular with a domed ceiling, a design common in Templar architecture. Knights Templar commanderies across Europe featured circular churches modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Finding such a structure beneath Oak Island would provide compelling evidence of Templar construction. The engineering sophistication revealed by these surveys also matches Templar capabilities. The flood tunnel system isn't simply a straight channel from beach to pit. It's a network of tributaries and distributaries designed to ensure that seawater reaches the money pit, even if some tunnels are blocked or collapse. This kind of redundant engineering building multiple backup systems to ensure long-term functionality is characteristic of Templar construction projects in Europe. Consider also what hasn't been found on Oak Island. There's no evidence of a pirate settlement, no remains of ships typical of the golden age of piracy, no artifacts clearly dating from the 17th or 18th centuries, when pirates supposedly ruled the Caribbean. If pirates built the money pit, where are the rum bottles, the weapons, the everyday items that pirates would have discarded during months of construction work? The absence of such mundane artifacts suggests that whoever built the money pit wasn't living on the island for an extended period, but came prepared for a specific construction project and departed cleanly. The pattern that emerges from all this evidence, the carved stones, the architectural anomalies, the indigenous accounts, the physical artifacts, the engineering sophistication, points toward medieval European presence in North America, specifically a presence connected to religious military orders like the Templars. No single piece of evidence is conclusive. Each can be explained away or dismissed as coincidence, misinterpretation, or modern forgery. But taken together, they create a narrative that's harder to dismiss. The question isn't whether medieval Europeans could have reached North America. Viking settlements prove they did. The question is whether a specific group, the Knights Templar, had motive, means, and opportunity to not just reach North America, but to construct elaborate underground facilities there. The answer to motive is clear. They had artifacts or documents so valuable, they needed to hide them beyond any medieval monarch's reach. The means? They possessed ships, resources, and engineering knowledge. The opportunity? They had advance warning of their suppression, and time to organize an evacuation of their most precious cargo. What remains missing is definitive proof, a dated artifact clearly showing Templar origin, or documents describing the voyage, or architectural features that can't be explained by any other theory. That proof might lie at the bottom of the money pit, protected by the very flood tunnel system that has stymied treasure hunters for 2 centuries. Or it might be scattered across multiple sites in Nova Scotia, waiting for someone to connect the final dots. To understand what might lie beneath Oak Island, we need to examine what the Knights Templar actually found during their excavations beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This requires looking beyond conventional historical accounts into the murky territory where archaeology, legend, and suppressed historical records intersect. Because if the Templars didn't find something extraordinary during those 9 years of digging, their subsequent rise to power makes no sense. And if what they found was merely conventional treasure gold, silver, precious stones, it wouldn't explain why they needed to hide it on a remote island thousands of miles from civilization rather than in any of their established European commanderies. The conventional treasures of Solomon's Temple, as described in biblical accounts, were impressive by any standard. The first book of Kings describes the temple's construction under Solomon around 950 B.C., detailing vast quantities of gold, silver, bronze, and precious materials. The temple housed the Ark of the Covenant, golden lampstands, altars overlaid with gold, and treasures accumulated from across Solomon's empire. When the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 B.C., these items supposedly disappeared, either carried off by the conquerors or hidden by priests who knew the city would fall. But here's what makes the Templar excavations particularly intriguing. They didn't dig randomly. They focused on specific areas beneath the Temple Mount, following what appeared to be detailed plans. This suggests they weren't looking for treasure in general, but for specific items whose location had been recorded. Where did they get this information? The most compelling theory traces back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly the copper scroll discovered in Cave 3 at Qumran in 1952. The copper scroll is unique among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Unlike the others, which contain religious texts and biblical commentaries, the copper scroll is essentially a treasure map. Written on copper sheets rather than parchment or papyrus, it lists 64 locations where vast quantities of gold, silver, and sacred objects were hidden before the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D. The quantities described are so enormous tons of gold and silver that many scholars dismissed the scroll as fantasy or allegory. But recent analysis suggests the measurements and locations are genuine, describing real hiding places used by temple priests who knew Jerusalem would fall. If copies of this information existed in the 12th century, perhaps preserved in Byzantine archives or discovered by crusaders during the conquest of Jerusalem, the Templars could have known exactly where to dig. And if they found even a fraction of what the copper scroll describes, it would explain their rapid accumulation of wealth. But wealth alone doesn't explain why they would need to transport their treasure across the Atlantic rather than hiding it in the extensive network of Templar commanderies across Europe, unless what they found wasn't just treasure. Unless among the gold and silver they discovered objects that were far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Objects that the medieval church would consider heretical or that challenged fundamental assumptions about biblical history. Objects whose very existence could undermine religious and political authority across Christendom. Consider the Ark of the Covenant itself. Biblical accounts describe it as a gold-covered wooden chest containing the stone tablets bearing the 10 Commandments. But the Ark was also described as possessing extraordinary properties. It could strike down those who touched it improperly. It led the Israelites through the wilderness. It brought down the walls of Jericho. Medieval religious authorities interpreted these accounts as divine miracles. But what if the Ark was something else? What if it was a device constructed with knowledge that predated biblical civilization, technology disguised as religious relic? Ethiopian tradition claims the Ark resides in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, guarded by a single monk who can never leave the church grounds. But there's no verifiable evidence supporting this claim, and the Ethiopian church refuses to allow any examination of their supposed Ark. More intriguing are Jewish traditions that claim the Ark was hidden beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonian conquest, placed in a specially prepared chamber where it would remain until the Messiah comes. If the Templars found that chamber, if they recovered the Ark, they would possess the most powerful religious relic in history, and one whose physical properties might reveal uncomfortable truths about ancient technology. Then there are the scrolls and texts. The temple libraries would have contained not just biblical manuscripts, but records dating back to Solomon's time and earlier. Solomon was renowned for his wisdom, but biblical accounts suggest his knowledge came from multiple sources, including the Queen of Sheba, who brought with her treasures from lands to the south, possibly Egypt or even further into Africa. If Solomon's temple contained records of this knowledge, including texts describing technologies or historical accounts that contradicted biblical narratives, such documents would be explosively dangerous. Imagine the Templars discovering scrolls that described the construction techniques used in the Great Pyramid, written by Egyptian scribes who knew the secrets firsthand, or texts that revealed Solomon's wisdom came from studying ancient Egyptian magical and scientific traditions, or records showing that biblical patriarchs had contact with civilizations the church insisted didn't exist. Such discoveries would give the Templars tremendous leverage but would also make them targets. The medieval church maintained strict control over historical and religious narratives. Anyone possessing information that contradicted those narratives faced suppression or destruction. This explains why the Templars might have needed Oak Island. Their European commanderies, no matter how fortified, were vulnerable to raids by kings or papal forces. Any treasure hidden in Europe could be found and seized. But an island off the coast of Nova Scotia, thousands of miles from any medieval authority, protected by an ocean that few sailors dared to cross, that was secure, in a way that no European fortress could. matched the engineering of the money pit itself suggests. It was designed to protect objects that needed very specific storage conditions. The elaborate platforms every 10 feet aren't just obstacles. They create air pockets that would prevent complete flooding and maintain stable humidity levels. The various layers of different materials, clay, coconut fiber, charcoal, putty, aren't random but serve specific preservation functions. Clay provides waterproofing. Coconut fiber acts as a filter. Charcoal absorbs moisture and prevents organic decay. This is sophisticated archival preservation, the kind used to protect parchment and precious objects from environmental damage. The depth of the shaft also makes sense if you're trying to maintain stable temperatures. At 150 feet below ground, temperature variations are minimal year-round. This would be ideal for preserving ancient texts or artifacts sensitive to temperature fluctuations. The flooding mechanism, while it prevents easy access, also creates a sterile, low-oxygen environment that would inhibit bacterial decay and prevent deterioration of organic materials. Consider what has actually been recovered from bore samples. In the money pit, fragments of parchment have been found at depths exceeding 150 feet. This isn't random trash or colonial-era debris. This is evidence that documents were deliberately placed deep underground, sealed in chambers designed to preserve them. The parchment fragments are too small to read, but their very existence at such depths proves that someone buried written materials with extraordinary care. Then there's the gold chain found during excavation attempts. It's not a treasure chest full of gold, it's a single chain, broken into pieces, found at approximately 140 feet. This matches the description of chains used to lower objects into extremely deep shafts. The Templars, during their excavations beneath the Temple Mount, would have needed precisely such equipment to lower recovered artifacts from the deep chambers they discovered. Finding similar chains in the money pit suggests the builders used the same techniques, possibly because they were the same people. The mysterious metal fragments recovered from various depths present another puzzle. Some show evidence of medieval forging techniques. Others bear markings that don't match any known script, but resemble symbolic systems used in medieval mystical and alchemical texts. If the Templars were hiding not just artifacts, but knowledge books describing ancient technologies or coded instructions for using recovered devices, they might have created metal markers or identification plates that could survive indefinitely underground. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from what modern detection equipment has revealed. Ground-penetrating radar and other scanning technologies have identified multiple large metallic masses beneath Oak Island. These aren't gold bars or silver coins, they're too large and distributed in patterns that suggest they're intact objects rather than scattered wealth. One mass, located approximately 170 feet down, is roughly the size and shape of a large chest or sarcophagus. Another, deeper still, has dimensions matching the biblical description of the Ark of the Covenant. The pattern of these metal objects suggests they're not randomly buried but carefully positioned. They form geometric relationships, triangles, crosses, and other symbolic shapes that match patterns used in Templar architectural planning. This isn't treasure dumped in a hole. This is a deliberately arranged underground repository. Each object placed according to a specific plan, possibly with symbolic or practical significance to the spacing and positioning. Now consider the reports from the Nessie forts from the 19th century describing bore samples that brought up fragments of what appeared to be cement or concrete mixed with precious metals. This matches descriptions of techniques used to seal important artifacts in ancient times. Sacred objects were sometimes encased in a protective layer that combined minerals, metals, and binding agents to create an impermeable barrier. If the Templars were preserving the Ark or other sacred objects, they would use similar preservation techniques, sealing the artifacts and protective coatings that would maintain integrity, even underwater. The timing of when various objects have been found also tells a story. As treasure hunters have dug deeper, passing through the various flood tunnel trigger points, they've found evidence that suggests multiple chambers at different depths. The cipher stone at 90 feet might have been a warning or misdirection. The parchment fragments at 150 feet could indicate a document archive. The large metal objects detected at 170 feet might be the primary repository, the chamber where the most valuable items were sealed. This layered approach matches Templar security philosophy. They built their fortifications with multiple defensive rings, ensuring that even if outer defenses were breached, inner chambers remained secure. The money pit follows the same principle. Each depth represents a new layer of security, with the truly precious items placed deepest, protected by the most sophisticated defensive measures. Over 2 centuries, Oak Island has consumed lives, fortunes, and reputations with a hunger that seems almost supernatural. 6 people have died in various excavation attempts. Millions of dollars have been spent. Companies have gone bankrupt. Families have been torn apart by obsession. And through it all, the island has yielded tantalizing hints, just enough to keep hope alive. Never enough to solve the mystery. This pattern of near success followed by devastating failure seems almost designed, as if the money pit's builders anticipated every strategy treasure hunters might employ and engineered countermeasures accordingly. The first serious attempt to recover the treasure beyond Daniel McGinnis and his friends came in 1804, when the Onslow Company formed specifically to excavate the money pit. They brought professional mining equipment, experienced workers, and financial backing that dwarfed the original diggers' resources. They successfully cleared the shaft to 90 feet, found the mysterious cipher stone, and prepared to push to the treasure chamber they believed lay just below. But overnight the shaft flooded, and they discovered what later generations would confirm. The money pit was connected to an elaborate flood tunnel system that made conventional excavation nearly impossible. The Onslow Company tried everything they could imagine. They attempted to bail out the water using pumps, but the ocean refilled the shaft faster than they could empty it. They dug parallel shafts, hoping to bypass the flood tunnels, but these shafts also flooded when they reached critical depths. They tried to block the flood tunnels at the beach where they emerged, but the system proved too complex, with multiple channels and backups that defeated their efforts. After 3 years and the expenditure of their entire capital, they gave up, convinced the treasure existed, but was protected by engineering beyond their capacity to defeat. The Truro Company took over in 1849, bringing new technology and new strategies. They pioneered the use of the pod auger, a drill that could bore deep into the ground and bring up samples from chambers below. At 98 feet, their drill broke through what seemed to be a wooden platform and entered a space containing loose metal pieces. Deeper, at 104 feet, the drill hit another wooden platform. Between these platforms, the drill brought up 3 small links of gold chain and fragments of parchment with what appeared to be writing, though the pieces were too small to read coherently. These discoveries electrified the treasure-hunting community. Here was physical proof that something valuable lay sealed in chambers deep beneath the island. The gold chain suggested treasure. The parchment suggested documents. The wooden platforms separating them suggested deliberate organization, different materials stored in different chambers, each sealed and protected. But when the Truro Company tried to excavate down to these chambers, they encountered the same flooding problems that had defeated the Onslow Company, plus a new disaster. Their parallel shaft collapsed, killing one worker and convincing the others that the money pit was cursed. Each subsequent attempt followed a similar pattern. The Oak Island Association in the 1860s brought industrial-scale equipment, including a steam-powered pump capable of moving hundreds of gallons per minute. They successfully lowered the water level in the money pit and began excavating toward the treasure chamber until they broke through into a previously unknown flood tunnel that immediately refilled the shaft faster than their pumps could handle. The resulting surge of water destroyed months of work in minutes and nearly killed several workers who barely escaped the collapsing shaft. The pattern became clear. The money pit's builders had anticipated every obvious strategy and engineered solutions to defeat them. Try to bail out the water? The flood tunnels provide infinite refilling from the ocean. Dig parallel shafts? They flood too once they reach the depth where they intersect with the tunnel system. Lock the tunnels at the beach? There are too many, too widely distributed, with backup channels that activate when primary routes are blocked. Use explosives to destroy the tunnels? The resulting collapses create new routes for water to flow, and the chambers you're trying to reach get buried under tons of rubble. By the early 20th century, a new strategy emerged. Rather than trying to defeat the flooding, why not drill through it? If you could lower a drill through the flooded shaft to the treasure chamber, you could bring up samples proving what lay below, then design a targeted recovery strategy. Multiple companies tried this approach with varying degrees of success. Bore holes reached depths exceeding 150 feet, penetrated multiple wooden platforms and clay layers, and brought up samples that included more parchment fragments, pieces of metal, and traces of gold. One particularly significant drill attempt in 1897 brought up a tiny piece of parchment with 2 letters visible, Vi, or possibly UI. The parchment was thin, high-quality vellum of the type used for important medieval documents. Chemical analysis suggested it was several centuries old, but most intriguingly, the letters appeared to be written in iron gall ink, using a style of calligraphy common in medieval Europe. This single fragment, barely large enough to hold 2 letters, provided the strongest physical evidence yet that the money pit contained medieval documents, but drilling brought its own problems. Each borehole potentially damaged whatever lay below, punching through protective layers and allowing water and debris to contaminate sealed chambers. Worse, the multiplying boreholes created new routes for water to flow, making the flooding problem even more complex. By the 1930s, so many holes had been drilled that the original money pit shaft could no longer be precisely located. It had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that its exact position was lost among dozens of excavations and cave-ins, the human cost mounted alongside the financial losses. In 1861, a boiler exploded during pumping operations, killing one worker. In 1897, a worker named Maynard Kaiser fell into the pit and drowned when his safety line broke. In 1965, 4 men died when they were overcome by fumes while working in one of the shafts, possibly carbon monoxide from pumps, or perhaps hydrogen sulfide from disturbed organic material deep underground. Each death added to the island's dark reputation, but also seemed to increase obsession among certain treasure hunters who became convinced that the deaths were sacrifices, demanded by the treasure before it would reveal itself. This kind of magical thinking has always surrounded Oak Island, transforming a straightforward engineering puzzle into something approaching religious obsession. The famous prophecy, 7 must die before the treasure is revealed, has no clear origin and appears to be modern invention, but it's been repeated so often that many people accept it as ancient truth. With 6 confirmed deaths associated with the money pit, some treasure hunters have actually expressed a perverse eagerness for the prophesied 7th death, as if human sacrifice could compel the island to surrender its secrets. The reality is more prosaic, but perhaps more disturbing. The money pit is simply an extraordinarily dangerous excavation site. The combination of flooding, unstable walls, toxic gases, collapsing tunnels, and heavy equipment operating in confined spaces creates hazards that would challenge even modern safety protocols. In the 18th and 19th centuries, with minimal safety equipment and no understanding of the underground complexities they were dealing with, workers were risking their lives every time they descended into the shafts. Modern attempts have brought more sophisticated technology, but similar frustration. In the 1970s, the Triton Alliance used hydraulic excavators and heavy-duty pumps, successfully creating a large open excavation in the money pit area. They managed to reach approximately 140 feet, the deepest any conventional excavation had achieved before hitting the water-bearing layers that defeated all pumping efforts. Their underwater camera, lowered into the flooded chambers, captured grainy footage that some interpret as showing worked stone chambers, wooden chests, and even a human hand, though skeptics argue the images are simply rock formations and debris, with interpretation driven by expectation rather than evidence. The Oak Island Tours Company, which currently owns most of the island and conducts excavations featured in the History Channel's The Curse of Oak Island television series, has taken the most comprehensive approach yet. They've conducted extensive archaeological surveys, ground-penetrating radar scans, metal detection studies, and carefully controlled excavations at multiple sites across the island. They've found numerous artifacts, coins, tools, wooden structures, stone pathways that prove the island was inhabited, or at least visited more extensively than previously believed. But they've also demonstrated how the money pit's complexity defeats even modern engineering. Their attempts to excavate through a massive steel case in essentially a giant tube driven into the ground to prevent wall collapse, hit massive boulders at depths that shouldn't contain such obstacles. These boulders appear to have been deliberately placed, creating yet another layer of defense. When they tried to bypass these obstacles by drilling around them, they discovered that the flood tunnel system extends deeper and more widely than any previous. Investigation had revealed the psychological impact of the money pit on its hunters is perhaps as significant as its engineering. Many people who become involved in Oak Island excavations describe an obsession that consumes their lives, relationships, and finances. They speak of dreams about the treasure, of feeling called to the island, of becoming convinced that they specifically are destined to solve the mystery that has defeated everyone else. This pattern has repeated across generations, fathers passing their obsession to sons, families dedicating multiple lifetimes to the search. The revolution in Oak Island. Research began not with shovels and pumps, but with technology that didn't exist when the money pit was first discovered. Ground-penetrating radar, metal detection arrays, 3D seismic imaging, advanced drilling equipment, and computer modeling have transformed treasure hunting from a labor-intensive gamble into something approaching scientific archaeology. Yet paradoxically, these technological advances have made the mystery deeper rather than solving it, revealing complexities beneath the island that earlier investigators never imagined. The breakthrough came in 2005 when the Oak Island Tourism Society commissioned comprehensive geophysical surveys using ground-penetrating radar. The results stunned everyone involved. The survey revealed not a single treasure shaft, but an extensive underground network, multiple tunnels, chambers, and anomalies, creating a three-dimensional maze beneath the island's surface. The pattern suggested deliberate design rather than natural formation, with passages connecting multiple points and geometric relationships that implied sophisticated planning. Most significantly, the radar identified several large underground void spaces, too regular and too carefully positioned to be natural. One cavity, located approximately 170 feet beneath the original money pit location, measured roughly 20 feet in diameter. Its domed ceiling and circular floor plan matched descriptions of medieval chapel architecture. Another void, deeper and smaller, appeared to be a sealed chamber with walls too uniform to be natural rock. These weren't natural caves or random excavations. These were constructed spaces, built with purpose and protected by the elaborate flood tunnel system that had defeated 2 centuries of treasure hunters. Metal detection surveys added another layer of intrigue. Multiple large metallic masses were identified at various depths, but their signatures didn't match what you'd expect from scattered coins or bullion. Instead, the metal appeared to be concentrated in discrete objects, large, intact pieces rather than loose treasure. One mass, located near the 170-foot void, produced a signature consistent with gold or bronze, approximately the size and shape of a large chest or sarcophagus. Another, deeper still, showed characteristics of iron or steel in quantities that would represent a substantial object, not just tools or debris. The pattern of these metal objects is perhaps most revealing. When mapped in 3 dimensions, They form geometric relationships, triangles, and crosses that match symbolic systems used in medieval religious architecture. This isn't random burial. This is careful placement according to a plan, each object positioned with both practical and symbolic significance. It's the kind of spatial organization you'd expect from people who built Gothic cathedrals and Templar commanderies, not from pirates dumping stolen goods in a hole. Modern drilling technology has also revealed new information. In 2016, a specialized drill reached a depth of 180 feet in an area southeast of the original money pit. At approximately 160 feet, the drill encountered a layer of worked wood, planks, cut and fitted together with precision joints. Beneath this, at 170 feet, the drill passed through a thick layer of clay that analysis showed was processed, rather than natural, mixed with binding agents that improved its waterproofing properties. This matches techniques used in medieval construction for creating watertight seals in underground chambers. Most intriguingly, at 175 feet, the drill brought up fragments of worked leather and what appeared to be bookbinding material, evidence that bound volumes or scrolls had been stored at that depth. Chemical analysis of the leather showed tanning techniques consistent with medieval European practices. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from this depth produced results clustering around 1350 to 1400 AD, precisely matching the period when Templar survivors would have been establishing hidden repositories far from European authority. The flood tunnel system itself has proven far more sophisticated than early investigators imagined. Modern mapping has revealed not 2 or 3 tunnels, but an entire network, with primary channels branching into distributaries that ensure water reaches the money pit, even if some routes are blocked. The tunnels aren't simply dug into soil, but are constructed channels, lined with stones and filtered with layers of coconut fiber and eel grass that prevent clogging while allowing water flow. The engineering shows understanding of fluid dynamics and hydraulic principles that were cutting edge for the medieval period. But perhaps the most significant discovery came from analyzing the beach at Smith's Cove, where the flood tunnels emerge. Excavations revealed an artificial beach, constructed by removing natural sand and replacing it with carefully layered materials. The bottom layer consisted of flagstones, laid in a pattern that creates a permeable surface allowing water to pass while filtering out debris. Above this, layers of coconut fiber, eel grass, and sand create a massive filter system. The entire artificial beach covers approximately 145 feet of shoreline and extends well below the low tide line. This construction represents an enormous undertaking, moving hundreds of tons of material, working below the tide line, creating a system that would function reliably for centuries. It's not the work of pirates or colonial settlers. It's the work of engineers with extensive resources, time, and knowledge, and it serves a dual purpose. It ensures the flood tunnel system functions reliably, while also disguising its existence. To casual observers, Smith's Cove looked like a natural beach. Only careful excavation revealed the artificial construction hidden beneath. The Oak Island Tours Company, featured in the History Channel series, has taken the most systematic approach to modern investigation. Rather than focusing exclusively on the money pit, They've excavated across the island, looking for evidence of who built the treasure complex and when. Their discoveries include stone pathways, wooden structures, and numerous artifacts that paint a picture of significant human activity on the island during the medieval period. In 2017, they discovered a lead cross buried in Smith's Cove, dated through analysis of its composition and manufacturing technique to the 13th or 14th century European origin. The cross's design includes features common in Templar artifacts, though not conclusive proof of Templar manufacture. They've also found medieval pottery fragments, iron tools manufactured using techniques common in medieval Europe, and most recently, human bone fragments that radiocarbon dating places in the 14th century evidence that medieval Europeans not only visited Oak Island but died there. The drone surveys and LiDAR mapping have revealed features impossible to see from ground level. Subtle elevations form geometric patterns across the island triangles, squares, and other shapes that appear to mark locations of underground features. Some researchers interpret these as survey markers positioned by the original builders to record the locations of various shafts, tunnels, and chambers. If this interpretation is correct, and if the survey markers can be properly decoded, they might provide a map to navigating the underground complex. Computer modeling has allowed researchers to simulate various construction scenarios, testing theories about how the money pit might have been built. These simulations reveal that constructing the flood tunnel system would have required a workforce of at least 50 to 100 skilled workers operating for 6 to 12 months. The tunnels couldn't have been dug during winter when the ground was frozen, so construction would have required at least one full summer season, possibly 2. This rules out scenarios involving a few pirates hastily burying stolen goods. This was a major construction project. Carefully planned and expertly executed dot analysis of the original money pit cipher stone, assuming the stone was genuine and not a hoax, has produced multiple translations beyond the famous 40 feet below. 2 million pounds are buried version. Some researchers interpret the symbols as a coded mixture of medieval Masonic signs and Templar ciphers, potentially containing information about what lies buried and how to safely recover it. Others see astronomical references, suggesting the stone might contain coordinates or alignments. Without the original stone, which disappeared from public view in the early 20th century, definitive translation is impossible. The modern investigation has also examined the broader regional context. Surveys of Mahon Bay have identified at least 3 other islands, showing signs of medieval European activity stone structures, artificial beaches, cleared areas that don't match natural patterns. This suggests Oak Island wasn't an isolated project, but part of a larger operation. Perhaps the Templars established multiple repositories across the region, diversifying their hidden treasures to ensure that even if one site was discovered, others would remain secure. While the Templar connection provides the most comprehensive explanation for Oak Island's mysteries, it's not the only theory that has gained serious consideration. Over 2 centuries, researchers have proposed numerous alternative explanations, each attempting to account for the engineering sophistication, the medieval artifacts, and the extraordinary security measures protecting whatever lies beneath the island. Examining these theories reveals both their strengths and the gaps that keep the Templar explanation dominant. The pirate theory remains the most popular among casual observers, largely because of Oak Island's proximity to traditional pirate routes along the Atlantic coast. Captain William Kidd's name appears frequently in early treasure hunting accounts, with some claiming he buried his legendary treasure on Oak Island before his capture and execution in 1701. But this theory collapses under scrutiny. Kidd's treasure, if it existed, would have consisted of gold, silver, and jewels looted from merchant ships, valuable, certainly, but not worth the enormous investment required to build the money pit's defenses. Pirates were practical criminals who needed quick access to their wealth. The idea that they would spend months constructing elaborate flood tunnels, that would make recovery nearly impossible, contradicts everything we know about pirate behavior. Theory also fails to explain the medieval artifacts found on the island. The parchment fragments, the lead cross, the human bone fragments dated to the 14th century. These predate the golden age of piracy by centuries. Unless we imagine pirates stumbling upon an already existing medieval construction and adding to it, the pirate theory simply doesn't fit the physical evidence. And if pirates did find an existing shaft, why would they choose to add to its complexity rather than simply hiding their treasure elsewhere? The privateer theory presents a more sophisticated variant. During conflicts between Britain and France in the 17th and 18th centuries, privateers, essentially legal pirates, authorized by governments to attack enemy shipping, operated extensively along the North American coast. Some researchers suggest that a privateer captain, perhaps with ties to the French crown, might have used Oak Island to hide seized treasure. This would explain the engineering sophistication, as privateers often included skilled sailors and craftsmen who could manage complex construction projects. But this theory faces the same chronological problem as the pirate explanation. The medieval artifacts and the radiocarbon dating of organic materials to the 14th century placed the money pit's construction well before the privateer era. Additionally, privateer treasures were typically claimed by the sponsoring government, with captains receiving a share rather than keeping everything. A privateer who tried to hide a substantial treasure rather than reporting it would be guilty of treason, facing execution if caught. The risk-reward calculation doesn't support the enormous effort required to build the money pit. The Spanish treasure theory suggests that Spanish ships carrying gold and silver from Central and South America might have been wrecked near Oak Island, with survivors hiding the salvaged treasure before attempting to return to civilization. Spain's treasure fleets were notoriously vulnerable to storms, pirates, and warfare during the 16th and 17th centuries. Some researchers point to historical records of ships that disappeared in the North Atlantic, suggesting their cargo might have ended up on Oak Island. This theory has some merit. It could explain the engineering sophistication, as Spanish ships carried skilled craftsmen, and it could account for substantial wealth being hidden. But it fails to explain why survivors would invest so much effort in hiding treasure rather than salvaging it for transport back to Spain. The flood tunnel system represents months of work by dozens of people. Shipwreck survivors, stranded in an unfamiliar land with limited supplies, wouldn't have the resources or motivation for such a project. They would hide their treasure quickly and simply, then focus on survival and escape. The British military theory proposes that British forces during the American Revolution or the War of 1812 used Oak Island to hide military payroll or strategic supplies. Britain maintained a significant naval presence in Nova Scotia, particularly at Halifax, and might have needed secure storage for gold and silver used to pay troops. The theory suggests that military engineers, with access to resources and skilled labor, constructed the money pit as a secure treasury. This explanation accounts for the engineering sophistication and could explain why the location was never officially recorded. Military secrecy would demand keeping such installations confidential, but it fails on several counts. British military records from the period are extensive and well preserved, yet contain no mention of any construction project on Oak Island. The artifacts found don't match British military equipment from the relevant periods, and most decisively, the radiocarbon dating places major construction phases in the 14th and 15th centuries, long before British colonization of Nova Scotia. The French colonial theory represents a more historically grounded alternative. France maintained settlements in Acadia, Nova Scotia, from the early 17th century until British conquest in the 1750s. Some researchers suggest that French colonists or military forces might have constructed the money pit to hide valuable supplies, documents, or treasure during periods of conflict with Britain. This would explain the French-influenced place names in the Aisne region and could account for engineering techniques that show European influence. The theory gains support from the timing of French expulsion from Acadia in 1755. Facing forced deportation, French colonists might have hidden valuables they couldn't carry, intending to return once political conditions stabilized. But this theory, while better than many alternatives, still can't explain the medieval artifacts or the radiocarbon dates. French colonists in the 1750s weren't working with parchment from the 1300s, or creating lead crosses using medieval manufacturing techniques. A more exotic theory suggests Oak Island was used by Francis Bacon and his associates to hide Shakespearean manuscripts and evidence of Bacon's authorship. Proponents argue that Bacon, who was interested in colonization and had connections to early American settlements, might have used Oak Island to preserve literary works and historical documents he couldn't safely keep in England. This theory appeals to those convinced of alternative authorship, theories for Shakespeare's plays, and links to broader conspiracy theories about hidden knowledge and secret societies. While intellectually intriguing, this theory lacks evidential support. Bacon's documented activities don't include any visits to Nova Scotia or involvement with Oak Island. The theory requires accepting multiple controversial premises: that Bacon wrote Shakespeare's plays, that he had reason to hide evidence of this in North America, and that he had resources and motivation to construct the money pit. It's conspiracy theory rather than historical analysis, relying more on imagination than evidence. The indigenous construction theory has been proposed but never gained serious traction. Some early researchers suggested that Micmac peoples or their ancestors might have built the money pit, perhaps burying tribal treasures or sacred objects. But this theory fails on multiple grounds. First, the engineering shows European rather than indigenous techniques flood tunnels. Coconut fiber imported from tropical regions worked timber using European carpentry methods. Second, Micmac oral traditions speak of the island's builders as foreigners who arrived by ship, not as ancestors of the Micmac themselves. Third, the culture and economy of indigenous peoples in the region didn't involve the kind of accumulated wealth that would justify such elaborate hiding. As the 21st century progresses, Oak Island remains one of archaeology's most frustrating mysteries. Despite more than 220 years of investigation, millions of dollars in investment, and the application of cutting-edge technology, no one has definitively proven what lies at the bottom of the money pit or who built it. Yet this failure to find conclusive answers has only intensified interest in the island, transforming it from a regional curiosity into a global phenomenon that raises profound questions about historical knowledge, treasure hunting ethics, and what we're really searching for when we dig into the earth. The current excavation efforts, led by Rick and Marty Legina and featured on the History Channel's The Curse of Oak Island, represent the most sustained and well-documented investigation in the island's history. Since 2014, the team has conducted systematic archaeological surveys, employed dozens of specialists, and invested millions in equipment and analysis. Their approach combines traditional treasure hunting with genuine archaeological methodology, documenting finds carefully and subjecting artifacts to rigorous scientific analysis rather than simply digging for gold. What they've found is simultaneously tantalizing and frustrating. The lead cross from Smith's Cove medieval coins, worked leather from depths exceeding 150 feet, human bone fragments dating to the 14th century. Each discovery adds to the evidence that medieval Europeans not only visited Oak Island, but conducted significant operations there. Yet none of these finds definitively prove what the money pit contains or who built it. Each artifact is consistent with the Templar theory, but doesn't exclude other possibilities. Each analysis produces dates and origins that fit the narrative, but don't confirm it absolutely. The team has also discovered something perhaps more significant than any single artifact. The money pit is not a single shaft, but a complex of interconnected excavations. Ground-penetrating radar and careful mapping have revealed at least 4 major shaft systems, numerous tunnel connections, and multiple chamber spaces at varying depths. This suggests the original builders weren't simply burying treasure, but constructing an underground facility, possibly a repository designed to house multiple caches or preserve artifacts requiring different storage conditions. This revelation transforms our understanding of what Oak Island represents. If the money pit is actually multiple connected shafts and chambers, then recovering its contents isn't a matter of reaching one specific depth, but of understanding and navigating an entire underground complex. The flood tunnel system might protect multiple chambers, each one sealed independently, each containing different materials. Some might hold documents requiring careful environmental control. Others might contain metals or artifacts that can withstand water exposure. The engineering suggests not desperate hiding, but systematic, long-term preservation. Yet this complexity makes recovery exponentially more difficult. Modern excavation teams face the same fundamental problem that defeated their predecessors. How do you drain a system designed to defeat draining? The flood tunnels ensure that removing water from one shaft simply causes it to flow from others. Blocking tunnels at the beach doesn't work because the system has multiple entry points, and the unstable nature of the soil means blocked tunnels often collapse or create new channels. Even modern pumps capable of moving thousands of gallons per minute can't keep pace with the ocean's infinite supply. Some researchers have proposed more radical solutions. In the 1970s, plans were developed to freeze the soil around the money pit using liquid nitrogen, creating an impermeable barrier that would allow excavation without flooding. The cost proved prohibitive. More recently, proposals have suggested using sheet piling massive interlocking steel plates driven deep into bedrock to completely isolate the money pit from the flood tunnel system, but at depths exceeding 150 feet, in unstable soil with unknown underground features. Such construction would cost tens of millions of dollars with no guarantee of success. The ethical questions surrounding Oak Island have also intensified. Is it appropriate to essentially destroy an archaeological site in pursuit of treasure? The money pit, regardless of who built it or what it contains, represents an extraordinary example of medieval engineering. The flood tunnel system alone deserves preservation as a technological achievement. Yet treasure hunting, by its nature, is destructive. Each excavation damages the site. Each bore hole potentially destroys artifacts. Each attempt to bypass the flooding compromises the integrity of the original construction. Modern archaeological standards require careful documentation, minimal intervention, and preservation of context. Treasure hunters, by contrast, have traditionally focused on extraction, getting to the treasure with minimal concern for preserving evidence of how it was buried or what that burial tells us about the builders. The current Oak Island team has tried to balance these competing imperatives, conducting their search with more archaeological rigor than traditional treasure hunters, while still pursuing the ultimate goal of recovery. This raises uncomfortable questions. If the Templars did build the money pit, if they did hide something so valuable it justified 2 centuries of deaths and financial ruin, do we have the right to recover it? The Templars built these defenses for a reason. They went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that what they buried would remain hidden until conditions were right for its recovery, or perhaps they intended it to remain hidden forever, sealed away because its revelation would cause more harm than good. Consider the implications if the money pit does contain the Ark of the Covenant, or scrolls describing ancient technologies, or documents that challenge fundamental religious narratives. Would revealing such materials benefit humanity, or would it trigger conflicts and upheavals that the Templars recognized as too dangerous to risk? The medieval world wasn't ready for certain truths. Has the modern world evolved enough that we can handle what the Templars thought needed to remain hidden? The financial reality of Oak Island also deserves examination. The island has consumed an estimated $50 to $100 million in treasure hunting investments over 2 centuries. 6 people have died. Numerous companies have gone bankrupt. Families have been torn apart by obsession. Against this cost, what has been gained? Some fascinating artifacts, certainly. Valuable historical data, yes, But no treasure, no definitive answers, no return on the staggering investment of resources and lives. This raises the question, is Oak Island actually protecting us from ourselves? Maybe the genius of the money pit's design isn't just that it prevents recovery, but that it ensures recovery will cost more in money, effort, and risk than any treasure could justify. Perhaps the Templars understood that the best way to protect something valuable is to make retrieving it ruinously expensive. Only someone who valued the contents for more than monetary worth would persist in the face of such costs. The modern investigation has revealed something else significant. Oak Island may be just one site in a larger network. The artifacts found there, the engineering techniques employed, the symbolic markers scattered across the island, all suggest this was part of a broader operation. If Templar survivors did reach North America, they likely established multiple repositories, diversifying their hidden treasures to ensure that no single disaster could destroy everything they'd preserved. This possibility opens vast new territories for investigation. How many other islands in Mahon Bay might contain similar constructions? What about other locations along the North American coast where medieval artifacts have been found? Could the Westford Knight in Massachusetts, the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, and Oak Island in Nova Scotia all be waypoints in a Templar network, marking the locations of various caches and repositories? More than 2 centuries after Daniel McGinnis discovered that mysterious depression in the ground, Oak Island continues to guard its secrets with a tenacity that seems almost deliberate. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. The mystery isn't really what lies beneath Oak Island. The mystery is, why did someone go to such extraordinary lengths to ensure we couldn't easily find out? The engineering of the money pit represents a level of sophistication that seems excessive for protecting ordinary treasure. Pirates burying stolen gold don't construct flood tunnel systems that function reliably for centuries. Colonial settlers hiding supplies don't dig shafts 150 feet deep with platforms every 10 feet. The disproportion between the security measures and what conventional theories suggest might be hidden tells us something crucial. Whoever built the money pit believed they were protecting something worth far more than material wealth. This realization transforms how we should approach Oak Island. It's not a treasure hunt in the traditional sense. It's an archaeological site that represents one of history's most intriguing puzzles, a puzzle that connects medieval warrior, monks, ancient artifacts, engineering genius, and the question of what knowledge is too dangerous to be easily accessible. The Templar theory remains the most compelling explanation because it's the only one that accounts for all the evidence. The medieval artifacts, the sophisticated engineering, the timing that coincides with the order's suppression, the symbolic patterns in the construction, and most importantly, the motive. The Templars had access to artifacts and knowledge recovered from beneath Solomon's temple. They had advance warning of their destruction. They possessed the resources, expertise, and maritime capabilities to reach North America, and they had compelling reasons to hide their most precious cargo where no medieval authority could find it. But even accepting the Templar connection, we face profound questions about what specifically lies buried beneath Oak Island. The most romantic answer, the Ark of the Covenant itself, captivates imagination, but may be too literal. More likely, the Templars hid a collection of artifacts and documents, scrolls describing ancient technologies, texts that challenged biblical narratives, objects whose origins predated accepted historical timelines, and records of the Order's own activities that couldn't be allowed to fall into hostile hands. The value of such materials wouldn't be measured in gold or silver. Their value would be informational, historical, and potentially revolutionary. Imagine documents proving that ancient civilizations possessed technological knowledge we assume was discovered only recently, or texts showing that biblical events occurred differently than orthodox accounts claim, or artifacts demonstrating that human history extends back further and with greater sophistication than conventional chronologies allow. This kind of knowledge is dangerous in ways that mere wealth isn't. Wealth can be spent, stolen, or lost, but knowledge once revealed can't be unlearned. Ideas can overthrow governments, shatter religious certainties, and rewrite histories that millions of people have built their identities around. The medieval church understood this, which is why they controlled access to books so strictly and punished heretical ideas with such severity. The Templars, if they possessed such knowledge, would have recognized that it needed protection, not just from theft, but from premature revelation. Perhaps they believed humanity wasn't ready for certain truths in the 14th century. Perhaps they're still not ready in the 21st. The money pit's continued resistance to all recovery attempts might be telling us something important. Some secrets need to remain hidden until the right moment for their revelation arrives. Modern technology has revealed that the underground complex beneath Oak Island is far more extensive than early investigators imagined. Multiple shafts, interconnected tunnels, chambers at various depths. This wasn't a simple burial site, but an engineered repository designed for long-term preservation. The sophistication suggests the builders anticipated that recovery might not occur for centuries and designed accordingly. They used materials that would survive indefinitely underground. They created redundant flood tunnel systems that would function even if some channels collapsed. They positioned markers that could guide future generations if they knew how to read them. This level of planning implies something else. The Templars expected their order to survive, perhaps in hidden form, and eventually recover what they'd buried. The money pit might have been designed to be opened, but only by those who possessed specific knowledge keys, codes, or understanding of symbolic systems that would allow safe recovery without triggering the defensive mechanisms. If this interpretation is correct, then modern treasure hunters have been approaching Oak Island wrong. They've been trying to force their way in through brute engineering, when what's needed is knowledge understanding of the systems the Templars used, recognition of the markers they left, and perhaps access to documents or traditions preserved within organizations that claim Templar descent. The connection between Oak Island and modern Freemasonry, while often dismissed as conspiracy theory, deserves serious consideration. Masonic traditions do claim descent from medieval stonemason guilds that had connections to the Templars. Masonic symbolism does incorporate elements that appear in Templar architecture and iconography, and Masonic rituals do speak of hidden knowledge, lost secrets, and the importance of preserving wisdom for future generations. Whether these connections are historical fact or 18th century invention matters less than the pattern they reveal. The idea that certain knowledge requires protection through secrecy, that some truths must be earned rather than freely given, and that proper understanding requires initiation into systems of thought that can't be conveyed through simple explanation. Oak Island might represent the ultimate expression of this philosophy. It's not that the treasure can't be recovered. It's that it can only be recovered by those who approach it with the right understanding, the right preparation, and the right motivations. The money pit tests treasure hunters not just with engineering challenges, but with deeper questions. Why do you seek what lies hidden? What will you do with it once found? Are you prepared for truths that might overturn everything you thought you knew? These questions matter because what lies beneath Oak Island, whether it's the Ark of the Covenant, ancient scrolls, or documents that reshape our understanding of history, has power that transcends material value. In an age where information spreads instantly and globally, the revelation of truly revolutionary historical discoveries would have impacts we can barely imagine. So perhaps Oak Island should remain unsolved. Perhaps the money pit should continue to defeat treasure hunters, protecting not just the artifacts buried beneath, but protecting us from ourselves, from our greed, our inability to handle uncomfortable truths, our tendency to destroy what we don't understand. The island has already claimed 6 lives and countless fortunes. How many more will it take before we recognize that some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us of the limits of our knowledge and the wisdom of respecting what previous generations chose to hide? The greatest treasure of Oak Island might not be what lies buried beneath the earth, but what the search itself teaches us, that some knowledge comes at too high a cost, that some secrets serve important purposes by remaining secret, and that the most valuable things in life aren't always those we can dig up and possess. As long as Oak Island remains unsolved, it serves as a reminder that despite our technology, our confidence, and our certainty that we can overcome any obstacle, there are still places where the past has successfully hidden itself from the present, where medieval engineers outsmarted modern excavators, where careful planning centuries ago continues to defeat efforts today. The Knights Templar, if they built the money pit, achieved something remarkable. They created a mystery that endures, that fascinates, that draws seekers generation after generation, and that refuses to yield its secrets on any terms but its own. In doing so, they ensured that whatever they buried would remain safe until humanity demonstrated it was truly ready to receive it if that day ever comes.